take the hard problem of consciousness as an example. The hard problem of consciousness is generally misunderstood. They think it's about what is it like to be Hamza. No, it's more than that. It's based on two key questions. And I want to elaborate in the following way. Let's go back to the mango that I spoke about. So I'm eating this mango. So I'm having an inner subjective experience of tasting this sweet mango, okay? So that's the first part. The first part is, what is it like for Hamza to have this mango in this moment, okay? That's the first question. So there is what you call an epistemic gap. Can someone other than Hamza know what it's like for Hamza to have that sweet mango? That's the first point. Second key point or question is, well, how and why does Hamza have an inner first-person subjective experience arising from seemingly cold, blind physical processes? So there's an ontological question. So you have an epistemic question, ontological question. So some people are trying to address the first question, the epistemic question. Yes, we know what it's like for Hamza to have that mango because he can describe it. Sweet, tasty, soft, delicious. But these are words, and words are vehicles to meaning, and meaning in this context is an echo, a representation, or a mirror of that subjectivity. So you have to assume that the words that Hamza is using is representing a subjectivity that is identical to yours. You can't assume that, right?
Very simply, no one can assume that my experience, and make it really, really simplistic here, my experience of a patch of pink is the same as your experience of a patch of pink. The physiology may be the same, but this inner experience of this very simple reality may be completely different. Or my experience of a sound is just like your experience of a sound, even though objectively the sound is a clock ticking. But my experience of it, my perception, my inner apprehension of that, we can't just assume that it's the same for individual. The subjectivity may be different, and we can't. So even though the external trigger may be the same, the physics of it, the apprehension may be different. And this is, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now the neuroscientific rule would be, but we can map out his electrochemical activity when he's having that sweet mango. We can see the neurochemicals firing. Now, there is an assumption here. The assumption is that the same neuroelectrochemical activity is happening every time I have the sweet mango, and it's never the case. That's never the case, yeah? But even if that were to be the case, well, all you have is neurochemicals firing. How can you infer knowledge of my inner subjective experience?
Right. So it's correlation, not causality. You can't know that A causes B simply because A and B happen concurrently.
Even if it were to cause, in the question of the epistemic question, even if it were to cause the subjectivity, my inner subjective conscious state, it doesn't follow now you know what it's like for me to be in that state just by looking at electrochemical activity. Right. So that's the first question. The second question is something that I spoke about a bit earlier. Well, according to the kind of a physicalist universe or philosophical naturalism or materialism, and these words in the philosophy of the mind, physicalism and materialism, are used synonymously. They have different histories, but they're generally used in the same sense, which basically means that consciousness can be reduced to, in some way, to physical processes or material stuff. Now, what's very interesting about the ontological question is, well, we have a brain that is kind of reduced to electrons whizzing around, and we have a universe and a micro universe, the human being, that is reduced to physical processes. According to the physicalist or materialist, physical processes are blind. There's no intentional force driving them anywhere, and they are cold, meaning they're not aware of themselves or aware of anything outside of themselves. And this is known in the philosophy of the mind as intentionality, in a technical sense. So how can you have this first person fact? You can't deny that you're having inner subjective conscious experiences. How can that come from blind, cold physical processes? That would be the equivalent of taking a blind, cold stone, rubbing it really hard, and butterflies emerging, right? So one would argue that all the forms of physicalism, like eliminative materialism and reductive materialism and emergent materialism, the strong and the weak version, and functionalism, these are not adequate explanations. Now, one would argue, and this goes back to the scientific thing, so I'm squaring the circle, The neuroscience one would argue, what about neuroscience? When we know everything about the brain, we could solve the hard problem. No, no, no. It is well known amongst the neuroscientists and the philosophers of the mind, like Moderato, Monzati, and others. They argue that neuroscience has physicalist assumptions. It has a physicalist metaphysic. It has to assume that consciousness can be reduced to just electrochemical activity, even subjective consciousness, which is also known as qualia in neuroscience, or in the philosophy of the mind, is known as phenomenal experience. Yeah, so you can't say that neuroscience would answer the question because it already assumes a physicalist ontology. Mm-hmm. So if it assumes a physical ontology and physicalism as a metaphysic, as an ontology, can't explain the hard problem of consciousness, how on earth would neuroscience do that? And let's just give you another basic example. If we were to put, probes on your brain, Paul, and map out every single possible electrochemical activity and correlate to every kind of experience that you have, it still does not follow we know what it's like for you to have those experiences. And it doesn't follow that we now can explain how you have inner subjectivity arising from seemingly cold, blind physical processes.